today's program is Tiak, What Food Tells Us About Chinese Singapore Culture. We're very happy to have with us today Mr. Sean Cho, an assistant curator with the Singapore Chinese Cultural Centre. He worked on the centre's permanent exhibition, Singaporean, Discovering Chinese Singaporean Culture. His research interests includes Singapore popular culture, Chinese religions, and Chinese history. But his real interests are sipping tea, gardening, reading, and watching Netflix. He also shares his musings on live at Sean Cho on Instagram. I will now hand over the time to Sean. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Michelle, for introducing me. All right, so I'll start the presentation today. Okay, what food tells us about Chinese Singaporean culture? Because we all know food is something that Singaporeans are very fascinated about. And then, so what we chose this is where we hope that you can find that Chinese culture is actually around you. It's about your daily life. You can see it. Most importantly, let me tell you, this is not a cooking class. Okay, if you're expecting me to teach you how to cook, then this is not what you're looking for. A lot of the content that you will be going through, you'll be hearing today, is actually derived from what Michelle just introduced myself just now, Singaporean, Discovering Chinese Singaporean Culture. This is derived from an exhibition that is currently at the Singapore Chinese Cultural Centre. So I'll be summarizing them, giving you more content in more interesting manner. So before I go into food, all right, we need to set some context to let you understand what we are going to talk about better. All right, so a bit of history. There'll be 5 aspects we've summarized that has influenced Chinese Singaporean culture. Okay, the first one being that Singapore is located in Southeast Asia. So it means that a lot of our food, especially when the Chinese came to Singapore, there has to be some adaptation to local climate. Okay, if you can't find certain ingredients, you have to improvise. When you're in Singapore, you have to speak a different language, because if you're talking about 18th, 19th, 20th century, early 20th century, you'll be speaking a lot of Malay and Hokkien, because these two are basically the lingua franca during that point of time. Okay, and Singapore being a British colony, this had a great impact on how our culture has evolved. First thing, if any migrants, whether you are Indian or Chinese, coming to Singapore in early 19th century, okay, until early 20th century, you will notice that the British colonial government allowed these different groups to carry on their lives, because their focus in Singapore is not so much about governing a long term, but more of making this trading port successful financially. Okay, so all these different ethnic groups are allowed to grow independently, or in a way more organically. Okay, and the third point, early migrants from southern China. This is an important point that sometimes we might overlook. Okay, being from southern China, it means that a lot of our language spoken today, a lot of our food has southern Chinese influence. Okay, of course, if you talk about it today, contemporary times, we have a lot more different Chinese migrants coming to Singapore, so our culture is even more rich in this sense. Okay, but we now talk about something that's slightly older. The fourth point, diverse ethnicities and multiple cultures. All right, so this is something that's derived from the first 3 points. Singapore being a trading port, the British brought in basically the Bugis, the Indians, the Chinese, different ethnicities coming to Singapore, and this living together. Okay, especially how people interacted in hawker centers, daily life at work, has led to the mishmash of different languages and food. Okay, this is what we're going to see today. And last one being independent global city. This point would come in slightly later in the exhibition, in this talk, whereby how after independence, Singapore got more and more global, how this has actually caused a lot further evolution of our culture in Singapore. All right. So let's go into our dinner today, which is a very, very exciting food talk. Okay, so this photo I'm showing is actually a food projection table within the exhibition. So we are actually using a food projection to tell stories instead of asking you to look at the wall for different text. Okay. So the first dish that we are serving today is popiah. All right, so popiah was originally from Fujian, from Chaoshan in China. And then when it came to Singapore, the locals realized that they couldn't find, or it was hard to find bamboo shoots because of our climate. Okay, Singapore being very warm, bamboo shoots did not grow very well. Locals were very inventive. What they did was to get bangkwang, okay, or jicama, to replace these bamboo shoots. And the texture is very similar because it's crispy in a sense, okay? And it's quite a successful adaptation to the local ingredients. Today, if you look at it, the red grass kelp, okay, is no longer that much found in the popiah. And from this point, we see that the locals has adapted to local environment, as in the Chinese from China has adapted to local environment, all right? And if you go even further, this dish is largely a Hokkien cuisine, all right? Then the Peranakans made the popiah as well, because we know Peranakans actually came, were probably the earliest Chinese that came to Southeast Asia, all right? And they have a more, they have a liking for richer and thicker food, okay? So Hokkien's popiah has bangkwang, carrot, lighter flavor, but if you go for the Peranakan ones, they are a lot richer, okay? Have chili, spiciness in there, all right? The next dish we are serving here is Hainanese chicken rice, okay? So there is always this misconception that, oh, Hainan chicken rice is basically Hainan Wenchang chicken, okay? It's the same thing. Not exactly that case. Hainanese chefs are well known for their cooking, right? Most people would say that, well, they are the best chefs during the early days. That is why when we studied in history, the Chinese stayed in Chinatown around the same area, but the Hainanese, they lived along Xia Street, Liangxia Street, which is near where the British actually lived, because the Hainanese chefs or cooks are really very, very good at cooking. So a lot of the British hired them as their home chefs. So they stayed along that area closer to the British families. So what they did was this Hainan chicken, okay, it was the Wenchang Ji, the original chicken. They kept, in Singapore, the dip is similar, but it's more spicy, there's chili. The rice is similar as well, using chicken fat. But the chicken itself has a Cantonese influence, all right, which is putting this boiled chicken into ice water for dipping. There's this special fragrance or special texture after you put it into ice water. So this is a Cantonese cooking technique. Today, when you eat white chicken, okay, the skin is actually very, very flavorful, thin, in a way oily as well. So that is how you see a Hainanese chef taking on a Cantonese preparation method. So two dialect groups coming together in our food, all right, which is what living in Singapore was like in the early days. The next one, Yong Tau Fu. Okay, Yong Tau Fu is a collective term for all boiled items. Okay, Yong or Nyong, that word means stuffed in Hakka language. Today in Singapore, we see Hakka kind of Yong Tau Fu. We see Cantonese kind of Yong Tau Fu. They are both slightly different, but the original one was from China, by the Hakkas. Hakkas, as most researchers would say, they came from northern China, and because of different reasons, they migrated south. So today you find them in Guangdong, China, Fujian. So they were one of the earliest to actually leave China as well. They like to eat dumplings, okay, which are made from wheat flour. But as we know, when you moved from northern China to southern China, there is a lack of wheat. So something else must be used to actually wrap these dumplings or to make something that's similar tasteful. That's why the Hakka actually chose to put in pork stuffing. Okay, so you notice today in Yong Tau Fu there is this essential tofu with a pork paste on it, okay, or a fish paste. So fish paste came about when the Hakkas moved further south to Southeast Asia, to Singapore, whereby fish was in abundance. There were so many fish around this whole area because of us being along the coastal areas. So the pork stuffing was replaced by the fish stuffing, fish paste. And this is how we see adaptations to local environment again. There's this, I sidetracked a bit, because when we say that a lot of dialect groups actually moved from northern China to southern China, how do you prove that? I can give an example of Teochew. I'm not sure if there are any Teochews here today, but if you watch Chinese drama, you will notice people calling their father Tie Niang. Tie is father. Okay, if you're a Teochew, today you will be actually calling your dad Tia. Tia being actually the same word as Tie. So Tie is actually a term used to address father only in northern China. So when the Teochews called their dads Tia, it actually, from linguistics point of view, it proved that they came from northern China. So this is how actually research in linguistics helps with studying migration patterns of the Chinese around the world. And so this is the point on Yong Tau Fu. We see that there's local adaptation. At the same time, we see Cantonese hawkers actually adapting this dish to their own flavors, their own preference. Okay, again, ethnic groups mixing together. So just now we see that Chinese food or Chinese culture has this, in Singapore, has this intermixing of ethnic groups, dialect groups. Now we want to go a step further. Here we see actually mixing of ethnic groups leading to different dishes. Okay, so kaya toast and Nanyang coffee, something that is a staple of our breakfast, something that we always have for breakfast. The Hainanese, being again the chefs I mentioned, they worked in the British families, the Peranakan Chinese households who were the more wealthy, and the British typical breakfast would be coffee, toast with jam, sunny side up. The Peranakan Chinese, being very accustomed to the Western lifestyle, had something similar. But there is a problem. In Singapore, you do not find the kind of fruit that can be made into food jams. So the Hainanese or the Peranakans, okay, there is no conclusion at this point of time when who invented the kaya, but if you look at it, there is this similar sense of adaptation and learning from the British, basically, that when you couldn't find fruits, so what do you use to make jam, okay? Find whatever is available in this tropical climate: coconut milk, eggs, sugar, pandan leaves, okay? And then make it into a jam. That is how we got our kaya toast today. And interestingly, there is this Peranakan kaya, there is this Hainan kaya. So there is slight difference in their flavor and how they might have developed this kaya differently. Next one. When we talk about this kind of breakfast, you cannot run away from coffee. Coffee is largely a Western beverage, even though the beans did not develop, or it's not native to the European continent. But when it came to Singapore, if you want to import these beans, it's actually costly and it's not readily available. So what the Hainanese did was, they're very inventive. They got Robusta beans from Indonesia instead. Indonesia is neighbor, so it's much easier to source from that side. This cheaper and lower quality beans actually had a bit of bitterness. Okay, when you brew this into coffee and add a lot of sugar, which is not that flavorful. What the Hainanese did was actually to put it with corn, margarine, and sugar. Okay, heat it, prepare it, and make it into the Hainanese style of Nanyang coffee, okay, which is a very flavorful today. If you go to Ya Kun or whatever, the smell of the coffee is quite distinct from what you'll find from a hipster cafe, okay? Aside from this coffee and kaya, there's this egg that is essential to breakfast, okay? This is developed from the sunny side up, because you can't find sunny side up in Singapore, or that the way that it's prepared is not that popular. So what the Hainanese did was to put the soy sauce into the soft-boiled egg. And these three things, when you put it together, we have our classic kaya toast and Nanyang coffee breakfast. Next one, if you notice, our dishes are getting more and more complex here. Hainanese curry rice. Okay, this, we have 4 key items here: pork chop, curry chicken, babi pongteh, and chap chai. Okay, this is a very multicultural dish. We see pork chop. Pork chop is something that's a Western dish, but if you notice, there's no pork chop in Europe. All right, it's something that's adapted to the local preference. Then curry chicken, babi pongteh, and chap chai, these are all Peranakan cuisine or Peranakan influences. You put them together, you get a Hainanese chef's creation with Chinese influence, with Western influence, with local Peranakan influence. A dish that's made out of 3. And then now we're going to a slightly different kind of dish. So previously we have seen that there is dishes with influence of different dialect groups, dishes with influence of different ethnic groups. Now we look at chili crab. Okay, chili crab was invented in the 1950s. Okay, by Madame Choi Yang-jian. Okay, she used Chinese cooking techniques and to put it with Malay spices. She adds some tauco, tomato sauce, chili, onion paste, and then the very classic Chinese egg sauce. Okay, putting this together and then heat it with the crab. This will give you a very classic and nice chili crab. And if chili crab is not a thing, today we have the Western style black pepper sauce kind, or you can put the salted egg sauces. Earlier on, we serve this with baguette. Okay, maybe during my generation, I started eating mantou already. But from what I know, my parents, baguette was the main thing. So if you have been eating it with baguette, that means it reflects your age a little. Okay. All right. So at this juncture, I'd like to summarize from this 5 to 6 dishes that Chinese culture in Singapore, or Chinese Singaporean culture, is actually adapting to local conditions. Okay, the dishes has shown that we adapt to local conditions. Okay, for example, like replacing the bamboo shoots with bangguang. Okay, there's a mixing of different dialect groups from southern China. The key here is southern China. If you notice, there's not so much of northern Chinese influence yet. Okay, in the 19th and 20th century, and then there's a mixing of different ethnic groups. Okay, how the Western, the Malays, Chinese coming together, and somehow we can draw a conclusion here that Chinese Singaporean culture is a multicultural kind of product. Okay, but this point here I want to make is, since I talk about food, would this apply to something else? Okay, instead of only food eating, would it apply to our drinks? Okay, so I need to confirm whether this conclusion is correct. All right. When we go into a coffee shop, we order our kopi siu dai, our kopi peng, kopi ga dai, all these different kind of complicated names, which I think if a Westerner comes to Singapore, they're very, very confused. They're not sure what we're talking about. Let's see whether the hypothesis of these 3 points would still apply to drinks. Okay, let's start with kopi siu dai. Kopi being Malay and Hokkien. Siu dai is actually Cantonese. So the influence here we see is the Malay Hokkien plus Cantonese. Siu dai meaning siu as in less, dai is base. Why is this so interesting? Why is it not less sugar? Because if you look at this image on the left side, there's a base here, and there's another one on top. Base referring to the condensed milk that you find in coffee. In those days, even until today, condensed milk is used to brew Nanyang coffee. So this condensed milk will always sink to the bottom, which is actually a base, or called D. So siu dai means less base, less sugar. So it's more of a figurative sense. So kopi siu dai, we can see Malay Hokkien influence with Cantonese kind of influence as well. Let's look at another drink. Kopi C. Okay, let's think about it. Since we know kopi is Malay and Hokkien, what about C, as in S-I and C? What influence is it? C, it actually means fresh, or it can mean diluted. In Mandarin, we pronounce it Mandarin, or in Hainanese, C actually means diluted. If it's spelled as C, it actually means it's an abbreviation of carnation. So this coffee, when you put in the condensed milk, or sorry, the milk brand, is actually carnation. So that's why it's spelled as a C. We see again, more than the ethnic groups mixing already. We see English coming in. So this is a kind of cross-ethnic influence. And kopitiam, okay, we don't hear so much of this being called in Singapore. A lot of kopitiam, if you go to Indonesia, this is very popular. Kopitiam, cham is in Hokkien, as in mixed. In Singapore, we usually call it yuan yang or yun yong. So yuan yang is Mandarin for the Mandarin ducks, the couple, the bird. Yun yong is the Cantonese pronunciation of it. So different places call this different names, but having both the Chinese yuan yang Mandarin one with the Cantonese yun yong in a same area, we see that this is a reflection of how the Chinese in Singapore has different dialect groups mixing and living close to each other, influencing each other's culture. Michael Jackson. All right, this is my favorite drink in Hawker Center. Can anyone guess what it is? What does Michael Jackson refer to? All right, so Michael Jackson is actually mixing soybean milk with grass jelly. And it is called Michael Jackson because of his song. Okay, it don't matter if you're black or white. So it's from his song, Black or White. All right, so that's a mixing of Michael Jackson. So you see how interesting this is, because soybean and grass jelly is a beverage of Chinese roots or Chinese influence inside, but the name adopted is an English one. This shows Singapore living in a cosmopolitan society, actually accepting or being receptive to cultures from outside around the world. So drinks, from a drink's name, I can say that we have already confirmed these 3 points here. So now, I want to ask a question again. Let's think about what is the longest coffee order you can think of. Okay, here's the answer. Kopi C gao xiu dai bua xiu da bao. Okay, so kopi C gao, so kopi C gao thicker. So xiu dai is less sugar. Bua xiu is not that hot, so it's warm. Da bao is a takeaway. So this is how you put different terms together, and you see a largely different kind of influence that we just mentioned. There's Hokkien, there's Cantonese, there's Malay, there's Hainanese, perfectly in one sentence, which is a reflection of Singapore Chinese culture, that we are a product of ethnic dialect influence. And as our culture evolves, you notice a lot of our traditional dishes has gone through evolution. From the left side, we see the salted egg fish skin. We mentioned earlier on that salted egg Chinese sauce. Now you put it on fish skin, very, very popular. And then chili crab curry puff, mixing a traditional snack with a more modern invention of chili crab. Put it together, something new. And then Hainanese chicken rice potato chips. Again, a rice with a potato chips being a Western kind of snack. You put the rice and a Western snack together, you get a Singapore flavor. So this shows that our culture, or Chinese culture, is not static. So it doesn't mean that I've invented chili crab, I stop there. Culture will keep evolving, okay? And our Chinese culture would keep evolving as well. So that's why we have different new snacks. Now we move on here. We have 4 meals here, okay? 4 Malay dishes. From the left, we have mee rebus, mee siam, mee goreng, mee soto. What has these 4 dishes got to do with Chinese culture. So you think about it, the similarity here is the word "mi." Mi being Hokkien for noodles, okay, mi. If you pronounce it Hokkien, it will be mi. So the spelling of mi, M-E-E can be M-I, M-I-E, depending on where you are. So Hokkien yellow thick noodles are made from rice. They're different from the noodles that you find elsewhere, which is made of wheat. So this is largely a Chinese one. Even though mee rebus might have its roots from Indian Muslim hawkers, some say that there is more influence from Indonesia. Okay, but there is largely consensus that the noodle, the mee, is a Chinese kind of noodles. So rebus is a Malay word for to cook in boiling water. So when you put these two words together, you get mee rebus. Again, this is only possible when the different ethnic groups live together. So marrying of different cultures. Mee has entered the Oxford Dictionary. It is now an English word, originated in 1930s, all right? But this is slightly more interesting because Oxford said it's 1930s, but we all know that mee rebus started much earlier. So there is some research that's conflicting in this area, but we can be sure that mee has a great influence on dishes in Southeast Asia beyond Chinese dishes. Now we look at this one here, Indian mee goreng, extremely interesting. Earlier on, we see dishes with different mixing, but here it's more than mixing, it's more adaptation, more complicated. When we say mee is a Chinese or Hokkien noodles, okay, goreng is Malay for fried, so mee goreng, Malay dish, they're cooked in a Malay manner, Malay style. But there is this Indian hawker who actually adapted it to an Indian preference, okay, a flavor, which we find very, very interesting because there are three layers of cultural influences here. Chinese, then the Malay, then adopted by the Indians. So culture itself is never static. And I think there's one point that I want to make here is, earlier on we see how Chinese culture, Chinese dishes has been influenced by other cultures. But in fact in Singapore, or even the whole Malay archipelago, Chinese culture has entered other cultures as well. It's how different cultures has worked together to make the whole area more rich and more vibrant. So cultures, influences, flows both ways, many ways. And this comes to the conclusion that I want to draw, that Chinese Singaporean culture, okay, through all these dishes, through drinks, we can see there are three characteristics. The first one is a result of cultural interactions, how dialect groups and ethnic groups mix together, either produce new dishes or to adapt each other's cooking techniques. And then there's local adaptations, use of local ingredients in food. Not only that, using of local terms. For example, Chinese today using basa in their language, basha, as a wet market. This is actually a kind of local ingredient, I would say, in our language. The last point is Chinese Singaporean culture is actually always in evolution. It's a constant evolution, and it will continue evolving with your participation and my participation. This will continue. I would like to end my session with this image here. Okay, very Chinese thing. Paiseh peace. Okay, paiseh mean being shy or embarrassed. Okay, peace being that very small dish or small part of a dish. Every time you go for a meal with your colleagues, with your friends or family, if it's a whole plate of food, there'll always be one last piece to keep it there, you know, because you're paiseh to take it, like you'll be seen as greedy, seen as being unfriendly, selfish to take away the last piece. So it's always left there, and someone will say, "Hey, you eat leh? Hey, you eat leh? Okay lah, okay lah." Then someone will have to take it. And it must be under probing. Someone must probe you to eat it. Okay, so this is how interesting our culture in Singapore. But if you notice the name here, paise is the Hokkien term. Peace is an English term. It is now something that's entered our lexicon. And to prove the point that culture is an interaction or intersection of different ethnicities, and then that is a constant evolution. Okay, so with that, this comes to the end of my presentation.